Just passing to English. I would like to talk about why do we have to consider the impact of climate change on the populations. And as I said earlier, if I want to know how population would develop in the future, I need to know the three components. And they are all equally important, but I thought migration is quite an interesting and hot topic in Italy, so I would focus a bit more on migration today. And let's see the time that I may cover slightly on fertility, which is a new, extremely new research, and then on mortality. And then kind of conclude with what else do we have to do on this topic. I would like to start, but probably also the audience online, kind of just start with our own experience, because in the past, when we thought about climate change, we tend to think that it's happening somewhere far away, in Asia, in Africa, and maybe if it's happened, it may be in the future. You know, we're talking about climate change, maybe something in the next 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, but I would like to ask you, maybe you may have already experienced or observed that something has changed, and then let's see what are these events that you think that you have seen, quindi quali eventi climatici estremi avete vissuto, osservato nella vostra, diciamo, zona, a Milano, in Lombardia. Vediamo se, oppure possiamo anche dire, magari qualcuno di voi già pensato, senza fare sondaggio. Forse non funziona, abbiamo perso un po' di... Ah, okay, let's see if it comes out. I think we even know grandine, temporali estremi, siccità, big thunderstorms, Milano, sì, e alluvioni. E quindi quando vediamo più grande vuol dire molte persone rispondono che alluvioni e altra cosa. Riscaldamento, sì, tipo ondata di calore anche.
È cambiato completamente. In questi giorni, inizio novembre,
sì,
dovevi mettere la pellicetta o il cappotto pesante. Adesso basta il tailleur.
Io vengo dalla Thailandia che fa caldo, infatti per me va abbastanza bene, però non va bene per la pianeta, e questo lo capisco, sì. E infatti it's true because in the last 10 years the temperature of the previous year, or of this year, it has been record hotter than the year before and the year before, so it's keep on getting hotter and hotter. And I think actually you did cover all of the events that is mentioned here. It's a bit small, I'm sorry about that, but Italy is actually considered to be the most vulnerable countries in Europe in terms of the climate impacts. All sort of bad things happening to us, actually. We see all of this, the one that you answered, the grandine, the strong wind. We have, this is the statistics of last year, and it has been increasing compared to the year before. And in fact, the trend is probably like this. Also drought and floods. When we experience too many droughts, it's actually provoke floods as well. So it's a compounding these events. And if you kind of look, you probably have heard already that I live at Bologna. Città più colpite, Milano, Bologna, la provincia, Bologna, Ravenna. In fact, I have to say that I experienced it myself also. Like I moved to Bologna in 2022, 2023, and 24 we had the floods in Bologna. So it's sort of, one may also make this question that, and many of these events, the climate scientists have also linked it to human-made climate change. So there's a scientific method to attribute the events that we have said. No? We have said caldo, riscaldamento, or the strong winds as well has been linked to climate change, the heavy rainfall, the intensity, because if it's too warm, it creates more moisture in the air. Then we experience this intense rain that possibly in the past, even 30 years, we haven't had that, I guess. Then the question is, in the future, we are experiencing, so up until now, the global average temperature has risen to about 1.1 degree. Europe is actually the fastest warming region. We tend to think maybe it's a tropical area that got impacted more, but Europe the temperature has risen already by 2.3 degrees. So in fact, all of this impact that we see is probably quite higher. And these are the projections from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. If we let the policies of today continue, we're gonna reach about 2.6 degrees by the end of the century. This is the world of 1.1, and we already have experienced a lot of impacts. And they're kind of breaking down also the impact by different sectors. If you kind of read quickly, everything seems to be negative, on the negative side actually. We would have water scarcity, it would impact food production, crop yields gonna fall, particularly when the temperature gets warmer, because for instance, crop like rice, for instance, can pollinate at the temperature below 32 degrees. Whenever it gets higher, then it's really hard to grow rice and other plants as well. Then the impact on the ecosystem, sea level rise. So all of this impact that we have already experienced, and it looks like it's going to get worse, so more frequency, more intense, and more severe in the future. So I pose the next question. So this event that we are saying, so this is really the heart of the project that I'm working on. Do these events that we're talking about, the floods, the storms, the drought, sea level rise, which is kind of the slow process, but it's happening. It may reach 50 centimeters or 1 meter by the end of the century, depending on what we do today. So these things, does it impact human health? Does it impact human behavior? So that's a kind of the idea that we want to look at these relationships, and these three demographic components. So if climate change do affect fertility, mortality, and migration, it means that future population would change from what we observe today. And up until now, the major agency that do population projections, like the United Nations and the Institute where I come from Austria, never built in the potential impact that climate change may affect our health. I just pull out some of the headline from the news that kind of really point out towards the direction that these three components that I was talking about, it may really be happening. So things like the Italian Institute of Geography have just released their report that by the end of the century, so in the year 2100, most of the coastline, like Italy has a long coastline on both sides, right? Most of the coastline would actually, 45% would be submerged underwater. And that's included, in my case, in Emilia-Romagna, province like Ravenna would got hit quite hard as well. And then they kind of say, well, at least now we observe about 800,000 people, so almost 1 million people living along this coastline. So if it's going to be underwater, what's it going to happen to these people? Do they have to move? Probably they will have to. So this kind of impact on migration, we may already start feeling within Italy. So that's one thing. And all of this heat that we were talking about, the summer heat wave, this is the statistics from this year, and Italy actually experienced, the whole of Italy is around 4,500 people that excess mortality during the summer, and many have been attributed to because they were experiencing heat wave. Milan alone, it was estimated to be 1,156 dead. And I would say that this number is quite high because we can do much more to prevent this premature death, right? Because people die from heat, so that there's some policy that one have to think about. But it's already here, it's already happening. So if in the future it would get warmer, then are we going to see more people would lose their life because of heat or because of other things? So this is something that we have to think about as well, right? To adapt to this. And then this is relatively new also for demographers to think that heat, stress, can affect fertility. Now, the word fertilità perché in inglese sarebbe fecundity, yeah. So it's just the opposite, but here it's really the ability, so the reproductive health, no? So this is what it is about, the fertilità. Because it, which I may have some time to go on over, because for animals, the study that look at animals also find that when they experience heat, like extreme heat stress, it affects the ability to produce sperm quality and also ovulation. So it affects both male and female ability to reproduce. So that we find some impact also on human now. And just to emphasize why I talk about these three components, because for us, for demographers, when we want to see how population would evolve in the future, we have to really think of these three components, right? Because if you think about, say, imagine we have the population in 2015, so I need to know how many people of different age group, of men and women, would survive until the next time period. And women are also quite important, because if women of reproductive age, those who are likely to have children, they survive, then we are able to calculate also how many children going to be born from the women, so the fertility. And then how many people, let's say, exit the population, and how many people come in and then go out. And that would make a complete kind of picture of how population would develop. And if climate change, as I was saying, affect these three components, or one of it, we would have to think about the future as well, right? Like climate change, maybe it's getting warmer, we get more floods, we get more storms. So how this population would look like in the future. And we're going to focus a bit more on migration today. And regardless of climate change, migration, as I said, that it is an important component. It does have strong societal and policy impact. You know, how migration would look like, how it will evolve in the future, apart from being quite a hot topic also in Europe and in Italy in particular. So we know that Italy already reached the population peak in 2014, so the population back then was around 61 million, 60.8 million, and started to decline. Migration already happened also. So from 2014 onwards, so the population started already decline. Now in 2025 we are about 59.7.8 million. So it started declining, but we do have two scenarios. If we stopped all migration coming into Italy, by the end of the century, the population would be half of what we have today. Even if we let the trends of current migration trends continue, population would still keep on declining. We're talking about possibly around 42 million by the end of the century. I don't talk about any policy implication here, but I just want to say that, of course, if we want to stabilize Italian population, so one could think about, if we want to go back to our 60 million, let's say, one could think about having more babies or having more migration if we need the population to grow or to stabilize in the same level. So now, what kind of impact that climate change have on migration? It's already kind of started being discussed actually in the media. Some of you may remember, this is before COVID time, back in 2018, that we may have seen the news that the people from the Central American countries, so from places like Haiti, Honduras, Dominican Republic, that they started walking actually from this country and trying to pass through Mexico and enter into the US. So that was really Trump administration, Trump #1, that was this period. And some of the media also link this mass migration movement to extreme drought events that happen in these areas. So they kind of say that maybe it has some link this drought may be one of the drivers. Obviously, it's not the only driver of migration. Then I just pull out some of other examples. So this one is more internal displacement. So this was the Somalia. When we think about Somalia, we tend to think about Somalia has experienced regularly drought, but in fact, sometimes also big floods. And this particular one in 2023, it was estimated that about 419,000 people have to be displaced within Somalia. So that was one of another kind of example that has been linked, floods events has been linked to displacement or migration. This is within the country. Just pull out another example. So this is the case of the Indus River in Pakistan, which is the delta area. No? So it started, apart from getting drier, so there are less water, but also the intrusion of seawater. So meaning that people have less fresh water, even for drinking, but also for growing crops. And this news estimate that, I don't think you know this number, I also didn't know lakh. So 12 lakh people get displaced. It's a unit in South Asia that they use. So 1 lakh refers to 100,000, so 12 lakh would be 1.2 million. People already moved since the 1990s out of this area due to this seawater intrusion and then also the kind of water scarcity in the area. So just some of the example here. So this is the common question that the policymakers like to know, because if we are expecting more intense and more severe impact of climate change, then would we see more people would need to move out or not? And if they have to move, where are they going? And for the European Commission, this is kind of with my collaboration with them, this is what they want to know. Are these people going to come to Europe or not? And that's the key policy question that have got asked quite a lot. I would show you some evidence later, so let's keep that for later. But this is not related to climate change, but we can also think about, okay, so if climate maybe drive the migration, where would they go, right? So this is, I just pull out the places where, in Europe, where people tend to arrive. So this including both undocumented and maybe documented, so irregular and regular migration. So in fact, as we know, the people who arrive by sea, or some people also by land, tend to come to these 3 Southern European countries, so Greece, Italy, and Spain, via different routes, and where are they from. So this is, of course, it's fluctuated a bit, depends on the situation, depends on war and conflict. This is in the early period of this year, so that's the first 6 months of this year. So we have widely distributed. People come from Africa, many also from South Asia, and some of these countries, as we see, have experienced a lot of war and conflict, but also some of the Pakistan, for instance, experienced both floods and then both droughts. So that's also the question. So if climate may drive migration, so where would people go? And I have the question for you also. So if people have to leave, so say if they will leave and leave internationally, right? Would they be recognized under international law? Because the statistic I showed you earlier, it includes also undocumented, irregular migration. So if we think about the refugee or the Geneva Convention back in 1951, which provides protection to people under certain circumstances, right? So if people have to leave the countries, they would get some protection. And the question to you is, do the people who have to leave because of climate change or climatic events, are they protected or not protected under refugees? Like, just a guess. Because it's quite clear, they have a clear definition, because when we talk about refugee, it has a legal term, no? So when you have to leave your countries and cross the border to another countries, you become an asylum seeker, so you seek asylum. And when your application get accepted, meaning you become a refugee, then you get all the rights, right? So you can work, you have access to housing, sanitation, and probably citizenship as well. So it changed the status between being an asylum seeker and a refugee is different. Yeah, so the question, so there are some reasons that you can ask for this, to become a refugee. So does climate is part of this or not? No. Yeah. And that's the, and in fact there is a debate. So should one include climate change or not as a reason? We could discuss about it later, but this is what the original recognition would be. You could get protection if you have the well-founded fear for the reason of political reason, race, religion, nationality, sexual orientation, and other things. So climate is not there. So that's the international agreement. And it's also not recognized either in the common European asylum system. So climate reason is not there. There is one country in Europe, though actually possibly also only one country in the world, or in Europe, I could say for Europe, in the EU, that provide for protection for climate migrants. Let's guess which country is that? Denmark. No, not even Germany. But yeah, let's guess, yeah. It's actually, I have to admit that I only learned about it earlier this year from my lawyer colleague in Bologna, who came to me and said, I'm actually working on climate migrant as well, but from the law point of view, and may surprise. It's us, it's Italy actually. It's the, yeah, under the 2018, which government was that? That was the, I'm sorry, I don't know which, who was in the government? The law was passed in 2018. Yes. And the law is applied? Yes, actually. So it's the only one country is that you can actually ask for the protection under the cause of disasters or climate or calamities. Vorrei continuare su questi numeri. So the people, so for the migrants, let's say, not to have the legal status to stay in Italy, so the questura can give the residence permit, the permesso di soggiorno. So the law actually allows the questura to make a decision straight on. I think because this is a journal that I'm the editor, and typically we discuss, do we send the paper for review or not, and if not, then the people discuss, and I think that's extremely active now. So up until, since the law was implemented, so from 2018, I only have the number, up until 2023, actually we may think it's not so many people claim for that. In fact, it's only 153 residence permit. Because I was wondering if you can kind of say, because all the floods, droughts, and Wi-Fi's, all of the events happening everywhere in the world, why don't people use this as a reason to have a legal status? Actually, the residence permit soggiorno, it's for 6 months and can be renewed for other reasons. If you have other kind of argument to say that I can't return home, but only 153. And I want to unpack why it's difficult to ask for this permit, to use this reason. For scholars who study, for social scientists, particularly when we study migration, we have to think more holistically, because climate wouldn't be the only driver of migration, but is compounding with different factors. And many of the time it can be that environmental factor, maybe floods, affect agricultural production, and then people cannot have enough food, or maybe they cannot generate enough income. And then it's that reason that they may lose their job, and they may have to go somewhere to find work somewhere else, or find food somewhere else. So it's not really directly that you experience floods and then you see migration, but it's likely to go through affecting maybe other drivers of migration. There is evidence also, I also did some of this study that some of the climatic events like droughts, in the case of Syria, for instance, Syria has experienced 4 years of consecutive drought before the Arab Spring started. And then through that drought event, because of poor governance, so not good management in terms of water management and so on. So there's a study that showed that the drought events in Syria kind of linked to conflict. And through that conflict that happened, also conflict happened, and then people have to flee and leave Syria. So it doesn't go like directly, but it may goes to affecting different channels. Like as I was saying, that the droughts or floods event may affect employment opportunities, and then people may choose to stay or to leave. And in fact, I have to say that even people decide that, okay, now I want to leave, it may not result in migration either, because migration is actually, it's costly process. You know? Like when you think of wanting to migrate, one also have to prepare, think about where to go, may need some resources, may need some money to prepare for the move as well. So it's not always the case that experience climate change and people are able to migrate. So I want to say that it's really complex, and if I really, or if the questura want to say that, oh, you can come because of climate change, one would have to also unpack all of these factors that may affect migration. It depends on the household income, on the economic conditions of the country, on the political situation, and demographic reasons and other factors that may drive migration. We can do this actually statistically as long as we can observe all of these factors and can kind of put into the statistics. I observe that the country also, or the areas also have this kind of agriculture use. I observe how much of the rainfall that the place experience, and also many other factors, and then see if I take into account all of these things, do I still see that climate affect this migration? But it is complex. And that this make me kind of think actually that maybe in the future, if we can collaborate with the law, the policy makers, that how can we use statistics to be able to help in this sense, right? So if it's very complex, some people also said, well, if we want to see if there is someone migrate because of climate change or not, if you want to understand the reason of migration, so why not just ask the migrants, why did they migrate? And in fact, there are some studies that do that. So they pick the areas that are quite vulnerable. So let's say the kind of the delta, the low-lying area, water delta is in Guinea, and then these top two parts. India and then in Bangladesh. I think it's a bit too small, I'm sorry about that. But what I want to say is most of the common reason that people give is economic reasons for job opportunities. And that's not only applying to this area, but generally any kind of surveys that you would do if you ask the migrants, like, why do you come to Italy? Why do you come to the UK? Or why did you leave your house? Most people would say, for better economic opportunities. That's the top reason. Of course, people move for other things, like I'm in Bologna, for education as well. In Milan, we also have students that come from, probably many come from outside of Milan, like in Bologna too. So that's common for education. Another common reason of migration is for family, particularly for women, maybe women who get married, then you change your household. So that's also the reason of migration. And in fact, climate is, or environmental reason, actually hardly anyone mentioned that. Despite the fact that these are the area of people who get affected by climate change. So asking the people, you're not gonna get that. Next, then I kind of say that we have another kind of approach, maybe I like to call it exposure outcome approach. So say that because all this climatic information I could observe it, I mean, the scientists observe it because now we have weather station, we have the satellite, so we know from, at least from the year 1900, every day, what's the temperature look like, what the rainfall look like, so one could go backward and see if people who live in certain area, what type of climatic events that they have experienced before, no, in the previous time period. And then we see that after experience some of the events, do I observe migration or not? But as I said, that there's some complexity. Imagine that I observe this household in one place in time t, so the current time, and then this household 3 years ago experienced drought. That's the first drought that they experience. So they may be, okay, I cannot grow this crop, but I change to another crop, or I change my job, so adapt, right? So maybe no migration happened. The second drought happened, again in the year after. Then they may still adapt, and then the year before also nothing happened, so maybe recover, so no migration may happen. So even though they experience drought, it can be in this situation. Or we may think about drought happen, adapt, so find change to growing some other plants that is more resistant to drought. But another drought happened, maybe even stronger than another one, still not yet quite recover, can still adapt. But another one happened. Now it's like 3 droughts consecutively. At some point, adaptation measures will reach the limits, right? Because you try, this is what the most common thing that happened. It's unlikely that people experience some kind of climatic events and then, oh, I would leave my house. Apart from if I talk about the floods that destroy the house, then people may get displaced. And then if the flood water retreat, then you may return to your house. So that's different. But let's say about this type of events, it's unlikely that it happens once and then you leave. So it's a longer process. But if one hit the limit, maybe now we try different ways, then the household may think, actually, this is also what's likely to happen. Say the household of 3 or 4 or 5 persons, it's also unlikely that the whole household would move. Imagine that maybe we talk about the rural area in Africa, then maybe there's a grandmother living with grandfather, and then 2 young kids, and maybe another two kind of teenage, or maybe 18 years old children living in the house. So maybe the household may say, just send one person who can go into the city and find a job. But it's likely that the grandmother or the grandfather would move as well. So this is also quite complexity there when we have the climatic events, like who's going. And if they decide to go, so it may not happen straight away because, as I said, they may have to prepare, think about where to go. Also think about the resource. It's just not that you just leave to go to the city. Maybe you tend to go where you already have your friends or your relatives. So it's quite complex there. And then where to go, maybe within the country or go out of the country. So that's a complexity there too. But the interest in this topic has been growing. This is a number of publications. It has been exploding. We have tons of evidence now, actually. I started working on this topic around 10 years ago, really during the Syria mass migration period. But now we're talking about maybe 150 scientific publications per year. So we have a lot of interest and studies in this topic coming from all fields, different fields. So it's really exploding. But the evidence are quite mixed. So it can be sometimes, as I was saying, sometimes because migration is costly. The classic example that I like to give, it's about the Mexico to the US migration. This is a common classic migration corridor that we have seen with or without climate change. Some studies show actually that when Mexico experiencing negative climatic conditions, like drought, the year after we see less migration because people cannot afford to migrate, so it can go another way around. So the evidence is so mixed that what I did is we do this method that we review all this literature that we can review and then see and synthesize this evidence. So what do we see from this literature or the mixed evidence? And now I'm quite confident, and it's also found in other literature, that what are the consistent patterns that we find in the literature. The first thing, just to answer the question also to the policymaker, generally migration, climate-driven, tend to be within the countries. So it's within the short distance. So we're unlikely to see, at least what we observe now. We don't see that climate drive people to leave their own country and then come to Europe. So there's no strong evidence on that. That's the first thing that I can conclude. The second one is those who migrate. Actually, they're not the poorest one and not the richest one. So we have people in the middle, actually, because as I said, migration is costly. The poor probably cannot afford to move. And the richest one, they don't need to move, they can adapt. So we have someone in the middle. And in fact, what I want to emphasize that maybe, what I want to point is, the people that we should be interested is actually, so when I'm talking about the people with people with high level of wealth, no, and those with low level of wealth here, and then people with high vulnerability, and then the low vulnerability. So if you don't have much of the, so it's the people here. So if you have low vulnerability, so there's no impact, then one doesn't have to move. And then if the impact goes up, maybe people also want to move, particularly if you have some of the resource to move. So the people also who have some kind of level of wealth, so they have the ability to move. But some people who get trapped, so those are people who are here, you know? So they may experience quite high vulnerability here, but they don't have much of the money to move. So these are probably the one that we should be interested in the most, those who cannot adapt and cannot move. So these are trapped here. And in fact, this finding really reflecting the migration theory. It's called migration hump theory here, which is, actually this is not related to climate change, but what I want to say, the finding that climate-related migration is really reflecting how migration would develop. No? So typically, when the country is still in the low level of development, let's say maybe low level of education, low income, then out-migration, so emigration here, it's low. When the country is actually developed around the middle, kind of medium development, with some income, people get a bit more educated, and that's where we see a lot of emigration in this part. Later on, when the country become very, one could think Italy is probably around this point actually, because we saw a lot of Italian emigration at some point, and then started going down, whereas immigration started increase because these countries in this high level of development start also attracting people to come in, whereas there's no need to migrate. My country is probably rich enough, I have enough jobs, so immigration goes down. And our climate migration really replicating this pattern of migration. We see a bit more climate-related migration, more often to be in agriculture-dependent areas. That's another thing that I can say. Then I want to also move to this part too. The studies, though, that I showed, that there's a lot of studies now. This is a recent review that has come out. When we talk about climate-related migration, so we tend to talk about, these are the countries that have been studied, so as you see, so hardly European countries are mentioned. So some studies in the US, and mostly in Africa or in Asia. So when we talk about the countries that climate migration has been mentioned, so that would be on this side, let's say the global south, apart from the US, there's a lot of study there too. But when we talk about where the publications come from, Europe pop up. So it's opposite of the previous maps, pretty much. Australia, North America, Canada, or European countries. So there's a bit of mismatch here. But this is common for scientific publication. It's tend to, other studies are also like this too. But seeing this, I want to make the question, that this is really new. This is the first time I present these results, by the way. So if we already seen that Italy has experienced a lot of climate impacts, and probably also one of the most vulnerable countries in Europe, and probably more impact in the future, do we have to think about would climate-related migration happen within Italy or in Europe? So this is my new question actually, because in the past, as you see, most studies, we only look far, no? We said climate migration, it's happened somewhere, it's not gonna happen here. So that was like kind of the question. Do we see that? So what we do is we look at drought levels in different Italian provinces. It depends on the year. We have about 104, 107 provinces between the year 2002 2023, so it's almost 20 years. And then see using this indicator that look at the water balance in the soil. So we can measure what's the water balance, the average in the last 3 months, in the last 12 months, 2 years, and so on. Then we look at this is quite a nice graph from my colleague. So we look at where do people go to. So the data that we have, we call bilateral migration flow. So say I have 104 Italian provinces, no? So I would know in each year, let's say for Catania, people from Catania, where do they go to in any of these provinces? And then who comes into Catania? And the same for Milano, from Bologna, and for all of these provinces. It's not very clear. We break it down by region. One thing, this is a migration pattern in Italy, that nothing to do with climate change for now, but I just want to say, as I said, people tend to move within a short distance, and this is what we find, replicating what we typically find for migration. Come here. Lombardy, that's where we are now. It's here, it's the orange one. The side of this circle represents the number of populations. As we know, Lombardy is the most populated region in Italy. So most people actually move within Lombardy, you know, from different provinces, maybe from Bergamo to Milano and so on. That's the common. Of course, we have people from Sicily also coming to Lombardy. That's we know. Same as in, where is my area? Emilia-Romagna, people also tend to move within Emilia-Romagna. Of course, some people also move from other places. Veneto also. So most of the movement also within Campania, within the region. And that's, if I show this map for migration of Africa, this would be exactly the same pattern that we would find. The US, China, people tend, if we see migration, shorter distance first. Then of course we would have some city or some area that attract more people. Like one would think that many people move from outside to Lombardy. Probably Milan is the place that attract the most here. Then actually I probably ran out of time as well. Showing some of the result for Italy, because this is new, quite excited to show, because never presented anywhere else. So we use this data and we see that with different drought index, it is different measurement depending on the length, but these different colors just show different drought index that we use. But what I want to say, so I split the migration movement between these provinces into Italian women, Italian men, the foreign-born women, so the foreigners, those who were not born inside Italy, foreign women and foreign men, and say if they live in the province that experience this drought, different drought indicators, do I observe migration 1 year after? And this is what we find. Even for Italian people, men and women are more or less the same, are still sensitive. We see that the province that experience drought, we see some of the slight movement also of Italian people that go somewhere else. But what is we find quite interesting is also here, so it's 30% increase from the baseline migration. Foreign-born female and foreign male are even more sensitive, so they tend to move. So that kind of answers likely the question. It can be because they may work more in the agriculture sector. That can be the reason. But really, we do pick up that drought does increase migration even within Italy. So that's and what I want to do is actually to move to other countries in Europe as well to see if we see that type of patterns too. Yeah. Another thing that I think at least it interests me, maybe it interests you too. We also split the, we also split the area into, let's say, all of these provinces that I observe. So I say, let's do the distribution, split them by quartile. So I have the kind of, this is slippery, the lowest quartile and to the highest income quartile. We're replicating really that migration theory or pattern that I was saying. The lowest one, I don't see the migration happen when they experience drought, and not the highest one either, but those in the middle. So it's quite, for me, it's exciting in a sense, to see whatever we found in Africa, in Asia, in India, I find exactly the similar pattern in Italy too. And what would happen in the future? So that's the next question. So I think I would stop here. I have fertility, mortality, but just to say that, go to my last slide, that, thank you. No, just to say that we don't have at least we don't have the evidence in terms of that there would be mass international migration. Internal migration is probably the thing, but what we don't know is what about the future when we reach 2 degrees, 3 degrees. So I think it's interesting still to keep on researching this. I hope it is for me. Grazie mille.
Grazie.